board meeting. I was trying to find a way for the EU3 to support taking Iran to the Security Council without making it look as if they were conceding defeat and admitting that those damned Americans had been right all along. I argued that the only way their diplomatic effort would have a chance of succeeding was to ratchet up the pressure on Iran, such as by getting to the Security Council. On July 15th, we agreed the United States would draft a brief scenario of what the Council could do once the Iran issue was lodged in New York. On July 23rd in Tokyo, I briefed Yukiya Amano, my Japanese counterpart, which was important because Japan would likely be a non-permanent member of the Security Council in 2005-2006. Japan was also moving closer to an important step, namely a dramatic drop in its capital commitment to develop Iran's Azerbaijan oil field, which they later took, thus reducing exposure to Iran's using its oil and natural gas resources for blackmail or coercion. The EU3 hadn't really given up yet, but on July 22nd, at a meeting in London, Iran flatly refused to budge from resuming the manufacture of centrifuges, insisting it had a right to uranium enrichment. When the Brits repeated the key point of the recent EU3 letter, namely that there would be no progress on other issues without full suspension leading to cessation, the Iranians turned to threatening bad things if the Brits didn't offer them more carrots. Iran's real bottom line was that it had no intention of giving up enrichment activities. This left the EU3 with exactly what their approach had long deserved: nothing. It was not clear, however, that Jack Straw was getting it. Powell said he told Straw 3 separate times on August the 15th that the EU3 deal had run its course at a barbecue Straw hosted in Britain. Jack didn't really respond, Powell mused, which further convinced me that Straw was our problem in London. He was not ready to go to the Security Council in September, Powell said, but hoped we might tee up a referral in November. At this rate, we would never reach the Security Council. On August 30th, Colin Powell told me he'd agreed with Jack Straw to seek only a trigger resolution at the September IAEA board meeting and a referral in November, i.e. after our election, bowing to Straw's weakness and playing for time to resurrect the EU3 deal. I argued to Powell that such tactics would guarantee yet another bucket of mush resolution, of which we already had an ample supply. As at the past 5 IAEA board meetings, I felt we had to at least try for a referral, and not simply yet again push the issue into the uncertain future. Powell agreed to talk to Straw to underline the latest IAEA report, buried within which was the finding that Iran planned to convert 37 tons of yellow cake into the gas uranium hexafluoride as an experiment, a curious characterization of such extensive conversion, which obviously allowed enriching the uranium hexafluoride in the new cascade. Converting to UF6 and then subsequently enriching 37 tons of U308 would produce approximately 100 kilograms of highly enriched uranium, enough for 4 or 5 nuclear weapons. Some experiment. Unfortunately, this new reality did not dissuade the EU3 foreign ministers, but the draft resolution produced by their Vienna missions was not even a weak trigger resolution. Instead, it called for another El Baradi report. Straw's original proposal to Powell rejected even by Powell. The candid Iranian negotiator Rouhani was saying in public that he knew exactly how to jerk the EU3's chain. Whenever Iran gets practically close to enrichment issues, the sensitivity of the Europeans rises, and whenever we practically distance ourselves from enrichment, their tone changes and you see a smile on their faces. I was mystified that the Europeans weren't mortified at this sort of thing, but susceptibility to shame was apparently not one of their virtues. I continued to press unsuccessfully for more at the September IAEA board meeting. One of Rouhani's deputies, Hassan Mousavian, said publicly that the reason the Europeans are asking us to continue the suspension of enrichment is that they want cessation, and this will never happen. In Vienna, our negotiations with the EU3 were proceeding well for a change, except with the Germans, who alternated between intransigence and belligerence in defense of Iran. Because of the EU3's desire to stick together, we followed their lowest common denominator, meaning the Germans were effectively running American foreign policy. Powell called German Foreign Minister Fischer who ducked responsibility by saying he was out on the campaign trail. Finally, however, Berlin erupted in anger against its Vienna perm rep, who was married to an Iranian, and he more or less ultimately fell into line with what we wanted. The Brits told U.S. Ambassador Jackie Sanders, who had taken over for Ken Brill, that the message Germany understood from Powell's call was, "Who is that asshole you have in Vienna, and why is he always saying he has no instructions?" Even so, considerable damage had already been done, and we were not able to recoup. That evening, Jonathan Karl of ABC News broke a story about Iran's weapons testing facility at Parchin, and the possibility they were testing detonation devices for high explosives that surrounded a uranium or plutonium pit in the physics package of a nuclear weapon. When the explosives detonated, the pit imploded, forming a critical mass setting off an uncontrolled nuclear chain reaction. Whatever anyone might say about Iran's conversion or enrichment activities, work on detonation devices and high explosives was manifestly weapons-related, something neither IAEA Director General al-Baghdadi nor Germany nor Iran could explain away. Everyone knew it. In Vienna, the press was all over a lead that al-Baghdadi had edited a reference to Parchin out of the IAEA staff report, which was par for the course for him. The IAEA refused to confirm or deny that inspectors had requested Iran's permission to visit Parchin, and that the request had been denied. Attention turned to New York and the annual General Assembly opening festivities, where I joined Powell. Right before September 22nd G8 Foreign Ministers Dinner, I briefed Powell that Sawyer still wasn't ready to accept this reality, figuring it might come up. Since we were nearing the end of the U.S. G8 presidency, I didn't expect much from the dinner, so I was amazed the next day to hear that Powell and the other foreign ministers had agreed to present Iran with a package of carrots and sticks. This was astounding, since a Principals Committee meeting a few weeks before had reaffirmed our present course. I found Powell in his hotel suite where he was leaving for another event. He said only that everyone else at the dinner wanted to offer carrots and sticks. The next day, the cable on the dinner was all over our government. It read that it was Powell who had said the offer to Iran should consist mostly of carrots. I saw Powell's latest as reminiscent of leaning too far forward over his skis early on concerning the DPRK. We were, of course, in the middle of a closely contested political campaign. Given the polls, it was a coin toss how the election would come out. I had already worried for some time that Powell had a different agenda, namely his own legacy. Colin Powell's pattern of behavior was widely discussed at State, some calling it the George C. Marshall Legacy Project, because Powell's acolytes were backgrounding the press that Marshall was Powell's idol, and that Powell had emulated Marshall's career. Powell's tenure as Secretary of State was much like Marshall's, the old soldier called back to duty, both of them being former chairmen of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, implying that Powell was loyal to Bush as Marshall had been loyal to Truman, despite grave doubts about the wisdom of many administration policies. Although my relations with Powell had often been complex, they did not turn seriously bad until the George C. Marshall Legacy Project really got rolling, in large part because success in that project turned precisely on distancing Powell from Bush. This had to do mostly with Iraq, but the Legacy Project was far broader in its implications, with far greater dangers. Back in Washington following the G8 dinner, Condi Rice and Powell finally spoke on October 5th. Rice told the NSC's Bob Joseph that Powell claimed the reporting cable on the G8 dinner was distorted, and agreed with Rice there was no change in our Iran policy. I decided to follow the famous Cuban Missile Crisis model when the USSR sent the United States two inconsistent messages, and Kennedy responded to the more encouraging one. I then attended Powell's next regular staff meeting on October the 8th with discussion on Iran. Powell responded, "Let me review what we have committed to here. I said at the G8 dinner that we felt we needed to go to the Security Council, but that we would listen to others if anyone else had any ideas. We are obliged to listen, but that's all. If the Iranians don't comply with their obligations, we go to the Security Council." I felt my backside was now sufficiently covered to begin blasting away at the EU3 for deviating from the previously agreed-upon road to the Security Council. On October 12th, the EU3 paper that had been expected since the September 22nd G8 dinner finally arrived in advance of a G8 meeting we had scheduled for October 15 in Washington. It was as bad as one might have anticipated, with fewer sticks and even more carrots than I had thought possible. But Iran responded by reaffirming that it would never give up the right to enrichment. We prepared a script for interagency clearance which would have us listen to the EU, but lay out our objections to their proposals, now that we finally had them, and maintain our position to go to the Security Council. Powell expressed general agreement with this approach, saying, "Okay, let me know how the meeting goes on Friday." Cheney actually thought the script was too weak, according to his staff, but he was too occupied with the presidential campaign to worry more about it. Powell accepted the basic draft and made small changes in it. I could not have wished for a happier outcome. Not only did I have Powell's clearance, I had 15 or 20 words in the text that he had drafted himself. I walked down to the Operations Center's 7th floor conference room where nearly everyone was gathered for the G8 meeting, scheduled to start at 10 o'clock. I let British political director John Soares start by reporting at great length on the EU3's latest cavalcade of carrot trucks for Tehran. Jim Wright, Canada's political director, was then helpfully quite critical of the EU3 paper, and said Iran should have been referred to the Security Council long ago. I let everyone else speak, and only then turned to our long labored-over script, which I read word for word, slowly for my usual manner of speaking. Soares then had a long response to everyone's remarks. Wright broke in to ask Soares exactly what the EU3 meant to achieve in terms of the cessation of Iran's enrichment and reprocessing activities. Soares tried to answer, but then Germany's Michael Schaefer interrupted him, and in turn Stanislas de Laboulaye, the French political director, interrupted him, each having somewhat different answers to this very basic question. Wright asked another related question and provoked almost exactly the same three-way split reaction. I could not have made up this scene of disarray among the EU3 in plain and very painful view of the rest of the G8, which alone was worth the agony of going through this meeting. The EU3 themselves knew they were not ready for prime time, as the German Schaefer tried to joke lamely about the virtues of trilateralism. On Monday, October 18th, Powell told me that Jack Straw had called, unhappy with Friday's meeting. By contrast, Bob Joseph said Rice and Hadley were very pleased with the meeting and its complete lack of impact on the campaign. As Powell suggested, I called the EU3 political directors, who were quite relaxed, focused on their own meeting with Iran in a few days. John Soares even said they were satisfied with press coverage at the meeting. Indeed, if the EU was distraught about anything, it was precisely that I had simply restated existing U.S. policy. Nonetheless, I found the 3 weeks after the G8 dinner the hardest of my entire tenure as Undersecretary of State for Arms Control and International Security Affairs, and indeed of my entire tenure in the Bush 43 administration. Along with others, I had foiled Powell's legacy gambit. I knew it, and he knew I knew it. Following Bush's November 2nd victory in the 2004 presidential election, the EU3, Britain, France, and Germany, presented their latest proposal to Iran, hoping they could obtain Iran's critical threshold decision to suspend all enrichment and reprocessing activities. We heard consistently from them, especially UK Foreign Secretary Jack Straw and UK Political Director John Soares, that it was essentially a done deal, only a few points to resolve, making progress nicely, wrapping up the last details, and so on. In fact, we heard this right up until November the 11th, when I spoke to Soares, who said with great fanfare, the Iranians will announce in 1 hour that they would accept the new agreement with the EU3. Iran was also sending a side letter dealing with 1 or 2 issues, where they will put in their interpretation, meaning the EU3 would simply follow its own interpretation. I said that sounded like a problem. Soares, happy as could be, said it was not. A few hours later, the Brits called Jim Timby on my staff to say that, having now read the Iranian side letter, they were asking Iran not to announce the deal, but to hold off at least until the next day. One point in Iran's side letter indicated that Iran needed just a little more time to run the conversion facility at Esfahan